Hey guys, this is Cynthia Yanoff, host of Pardon the Mess. Parenting can get messy, and that's why we're glad you're with us. Each week we have honest discussions with our guests about the ups and downs of parenting and the lessons God is teaching us along the way. It's fun, it's real, and it's biblical. We put our trust in a God who rescripts our mess into His greater message. That's the best parenting news we could ask for. Join us each week on Pardon the Mess as we walk the parenting road together.
Hey guys, it's Cynthia. I am glad you're with us today, and I can't wait for you to hear my conversation today with Jamie Sumner. Before I kick that off, I wanted to mention one thing to you. I've had several people asking me about getting copies of the identity cards I wrote last spring, and they are still available, and I would love for you to get copies if that would be something that would help you. A lot of people have told me they're ordering them for their graduates in their life, and they are sending them to graduates or even with a gift card, that kind of thing. Also, several parents have emailed me saying they'd like copies to send to camp with their kids as kind of the camp care package type thing with candy, I'm sure. But I want to read you a couple of the topics that I wrote on so you kind of know the gist of them. There's things in there like you are gifted, you've got what it takes, you're safe, you are heard, you are fully seen, you're fully known, you have purpose, you can stand alone. So that's some of the topics that are in these cards. And so let me tell you a quick story about them, and then we will get to our conversation. But I have a friend who had a housekeeper come to her house one day that she's never used before. I don't know that she's used this housekeeper since, but during that day, my friend walked in and the housekeeper had tears in her eyes, and she said, "Is everything okay?" And the housekeeper told her that she had found out the day before that her husband had cancer and that they were very concerned about medical bills. And anyway, she had just, as a Christian, she let her know that she was a Christian. She had started praying, "God, let me know that you're there, that you're caring for me just in some way." And she prayed it that night before. And that morning, as she was cleaning my friend's house, she said she came across these identity cards that my friend keeps by her kitchen counter. And one of them says, "You are fully loved." And it talked about how you are loved and protected even when it doesn't feel like it. And she said that was just the word from God that she needed. And so I'm so humbled and blessed that anything I write or say ever impacts anyone. But isn't that just the beauty of the Lord and how He uses things in unexpected ways? So I just wanted to tell you that quick story, but also let you know that if there's someone in your life that you think would benefit from these, they are available. You can go to pardonthemess.org and go to the store. And that's a great way to find them, or I will also link them in the podcast notes. Okay. Today, I'm excited for you to hear a word from Jamie Sumner. Jamie has written for the New York Times and the Washington Post. She has several books, but the one that we get to talk to her about today is Eat, Sleep, Save the World, Words of Encouragement for the Special Needs Parent. And if you are raising a child with special needs, this is the podcast for you. And if you are not raising a child with special needs, this is still the podcast for you, because Jamie just has a way with words, and she encourages us to be brave in parenting. And she talks about the way she's seen God's blessing in the hard places as she's parented her child with special needs. She encourages us, if we do not have kids with special needs, but we have friends that do, how to best help them and walk the road with them. And so I can't say enough about Jamie and how sweet she is and how encouraging, but really how practical she is. But also her book is a great read. No matter what you're walking through in life and what's going on with your kids, it's a great read because she weaves scripture in ways that I've really never even thought about it. So I can't wait for you to hear from Jamie Sumner. Here we go. Hey, Jamie, welcome to Pardon the Mess. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm excited you're here, and obviously so excited that I just choked over my first words that were edited out, but made me laugh. I'm glad you're here today, and I love that we get to talk to you about a topic that is so relevant to so many, just talking about raising kids with special needs. And as someone who does a podcast on parenting, we do not hit this topic nearly enough. And so thank you for just writing a great book that speaks into that. Eat, Sleep, Save the World. It's words of encouragement for the special needs parent. But then thanks for coming on to chat.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, this is awesome. And so I'm just going to ask you kind of a blanket question, because I think there were people listening today that will either have a special needs child and they're drawn to it for that reason because they need encouragement, or there will be people that do not have a special needs child, but they're impacted by families that do and just want to do it well. And so this is maybe, I don't know if this is a weird question or not, but I took it from reading through your book. You have a good word on this, but how does it feel to raise a special needs child?
I think that it has the potential to feel very isolating. Because I mean, if you're a mom out there, think about that moment when like you first become a mom and let's say your baby is colicky or something else going on that you feel like nobody can understand, and all of a sudden you've been pulled out of the regular world, like the stream of everyone else is just passing you by and you're in your bubble with your child and you feel like nobody can really understand your situation. And that's kind of how it is when you're parenting a child with special needs, because you look around you and the perception is that everyone else is operating one way and you are operating another. And that's the perception. When in reality, we're all operating all on our own little circuits and nobody has the same experience as anyone else. But specifically for me with Charlie, parenting him it's been the biggest, I would say, trust exercise that I didn't know I needed, in regards to my faith and in regards to how much control I think I have over my own world. Um, I'm one of those people that gravitates towards control or towards a plan, and when you have a child that doesn't fit on any of the developmental charts and who you just can't really predict what's coming, it really makes you lean into the present in a good way. And I mean that in a good way. It has been such a blessing to be able to open up my perspective and relax a little bit into this idea that we really don't have control. I mean, God has control. He is the ultimate parent of Charlie, and Charlie has been the gift that he's given me. And I think that's the biggest thing that keeps me kind of moving forward in a good way. If I can just remember that Charlie's mine, but he's God's first. And then it makes me hold on a little bit more loosely, I guess.
For sure, for sure. And tell us a little bit, if you will, about Charlie. And I know you have twins as well, but tell us a little bit just so we have some background.
Absolutely. And everyone listening, you got to understand, I'm able to record this podcast because currently all three of my children are at camp this week, like camps that actually happened.
Yeah. Bragger.
I know. I shouldn't. I take it back. They're actually under the bed. I'm just kidding. But so Charlie is 8 and my twins are 6. And Charlie was born with something called Beckwith Wiedemann syndrome, which is pretty rare. He was diagnosed in utero. Actually, we got the call to confirm from the Mayo Clinic, and I went into labor that same day. I don't know if it was related. I feel like it probably was, but he was born early at 30 weeks. And Beckwith Wiedemann syndrome is a rare overgrowth syndrome. It has to do with the pituitary gland. And as a result, Charlie spent about 10 weeks in the NICU while we were trying to figure out how to take him home safely because he was born with an enlarged tongue and some other complications. And so he ultimately came home with a tracheotomy in his throat to help him breathe. And then later we had to go back for a G-tube in his tummy to help him eat because he couldn't eat safely. Yeah. And then he also is diagnosed with cerebral palsy. He was diagnosed at age 1. They typically don't usually do that until age 1. So we kind of knew, but we didn't get the official listed on the chart until he was 1. And currently he has no trach, no G-tube. He breathes and eats safely, thank the Lord. And he gets around in a wheelchair. And he is mostly nonverbal. So he uses something that looks like an iPad, which is a speaking device to talk. I say he uses it. He really only uses it when he wants to use it. Otherwise, he's like, I have no problem making you understand what I need without this thing.
Yes. Totally.
Yeah, but that's kind of where we are.
That's where we are. Okay. And you said again, I'm kind of referencing back to your book. It was so good. It's such a great read for all of us, but you talked about something that I had never considered that you struggled with. And I think maybe a lot of people struggle with, but with the guilt behind it, that maybe in some form or fashion, you may have been responsible or something you did, or even going forward, are you doing enough? Can you talk to us about just that guilt and how you've worked through that? And I love how you even work through the scripture reference talking about that. Just share a little bit about that.
So, there are so many levels to this guilt. So I talk about it a little bit in the book in reference to, everyone. If you say mom guilt, everyone kind of understands that. It's this
Yes.
idea that you have done something wrong, or there's more that you should be doing. Always. And with Charlie, this feeling was exponential. And I think that's true for most parents of kids with special needs, because one, you always wonder, could this have been something that I contributed to in some way? For us, we had done IVF to get pregnant. And so we went through all of these worries of, is that what caused it? I mean, we met with geneticists and we had remaining embryos tested. Like we were very, it's not like we were searching for answers in hindsight. It was more when we were considering having more children that we were like, we don't, we want to do our due diligence to creating this family and trusting that God has this in his hands. And we just wanted to make sure investigate, I guess, all those little loose ends. And so we worried about that post Charlie, having Charlie with the Beckwith Wiedemann diagnosis. And then especially, when he was diagnosed with CP, oh my goodness, because they never told us why. We didn't know how he got that brain damage or when exactly. Was it in utero? Was it during delivery? Was it after? Nobody had an answer. And when there is no answer, it almost stops. It keeps your mind spinning forever because you can't put a period on it. And then later, of course, with therapies that come in, physical therapy, occupational therapy, when he started public school, there was always something in the back of my mind that I felt like I should be doing. Stretch his legs longer, be a louder advocate for this service or these extra therapy sessions, or, there's always a fight to be fought. And it took me a really long time to learn how to let go of a little bit of that guilt. And I think it really came with, and this is what the whole book is about, but it really came with this acknowledgement that God knows that I'm doing the best that I can for my child. He doesn't see all the things that I'm not doing. That's not the list that he's keeping. He is watching and celebrating all the gifts that he's given me as I use them with Charlie, because he loves me like I love Charlie. And so he's not watching me with a list that says, oh, she's not keeping up on this. Like, that's not how he sees us. And that's not how he wants us to see ourselves. And when you can kind of flip your perspective enough to be able to see what you're doing right and not just what you're doing wrong, then it can really change how you walk through each day. It can make you not a better parent, because that's not what we're going for, but just a more appreciative one, I think, for me.
That's so good. And I think that's just such a word for all of us, because there's always something more we feel like we can be doing. And I even know, like, through COVID and quarantine and, with several kids, my youngest is a toddler, like a preschooler. And I have been thinking just last few days, I'm like, he's just behind, like, on numbers. Like, I haven't done enough. I don't think he knows his colors well, like, kind of beating myself up. And I think that was what was so, I love that your book is just this giving yourself some grace, just understanding, like you're saying, look at the places where you're getting it right. And the Lord's for us and he's for our kids. And so take that pressure off and just know that we're doing a good job here, moms, and there's always room to do better. But I really, though, also I wanted to reference this because I thought it was so good. You talk about John 9:2 when the disciples saw the person that was blind and they said, Rabbi, who sinned? And spoiler alert, but Jesus says after that, neither this man nor his parents sinned. This came about so that God's works might be displayed in him. How has that changed your perspective on things when it came to guilt or what you were involved or didn't do or did?
Well, that passage touched me so much, because for me, what they ask, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be like this. And I love Jesus's response, because he abdicates everyone. He's like, nobody. You're not looking through the right lens, because you're not seeing all the good that is coming out of this situation. You're just seeing something that is not normal to your experience and saying there's something wrong with it. But what Jesus is saying, what he says in this scripture, is that nobody sinned. Do you see all the good that is coming out of this, and how this man can testify to what I can do and to how his life has been changed? And it's not about what started when. That's not the right way to see it. It's about what comes out of it and the good that you can appreciate now.
Yeah.
And I just,
with that bigger perspective, you have this quote, you say, sickness and health, wealth and poverty, all of it can lead to the same glorification of God if we stop trying to point the finger at ourselves.
yes.
And I thought, oh, that's beautiful. And so how important has it been for you to really embrace hope in the situation? Because I've got to believe for all of us, and I know for you, there's hard days, hard roads, want to throw our hands up, feel like everything's against us. It's trying, it's everything in between. And so how important has hope been for you during this process, and having hope in the right person and the right things?
It's funny. I think we have this perception of things like hope and happiness and joy that we're just supposed to come by those naturally. You know what I mean? Like they should just happen to us, and we shouldn't have to work at them like we do it with other traits. And I think hope, like anything else, is something that has to be practiced and worked like a muscle in order to be able to get better at it. Because it's not, I do agree some people maybe are more hopeful people than others, but I think that God calls us to work that muscle. And for me, hope, the ability to hope is really, this sounds silly, but because hope is about kind of looking forward and knowing that things will be kind of made right in the end. But hope for me is also about looking backwards. Like it's about seeing Charlie right now at age 8, and then seeing all those moments along his timeline where, like, he had a seizure that didn't stop, and we rode in that ambulance, and they wouldn't let me touch him while they were touching him. And I had to stand outside and watch and feel so helpless and hopeless, and thinking, this is the worst. This is the worst. And I don't know what's going to come from this. And then now seeing him, he was 3 at the time. And now seeing him 5 years later, seizure free, not on seizure medication, and me even more trusting in God's providence. Like, that gives me hope. All those dark spots that have led to goodness that I couldn't have predicted is what gives me hope for further things when we're in hard stuff now. It's like I have evidence to look back on, and it makes hope not feel so fluttery and feathery. It makes it feel concrete, I guess.
Those are our Ebenezers, like in the Old Testament, they talk about those places where you grab those Ebenezers and you say, God's been with us this time. He's going to continue. And it gives you hope, and it gives you a renewed trust and faith in him. And I like how you said miracles are best served under desperate circumstances. And what an encouraging word that is. Will you share a little bit about your story, about all the financial concerns you had and the preschool he was in, what Charlie was in, and just kind of how you saw the Lord orchestrate through that?
So, if the financial aspect of having a child with special needs cannot be ignored, there's so many layers to it. There's the layers of, will my insurance cover this right now? And what if we need this medical equipment? And what's the next phase of this? And then further down the line too, if your child is not going to be financially, physically independent from you, what that looks like. So there's kind of like a long timeline of potential. And when Charlie was younger, right when he was easing out of early intervention, which, the government was providing services based on his diagnosis. Right as we were transitioning out of that, we kind of hit a wall financially. My husband works in IT and I was teaching high school, and we didn't have a huge income, but we fell in this sneaky window of just enough income to not qualify for like TennCare or Medicaid or anything else like supplemental insurance wise. So we were in a really tough spot, and Charlie was in a wonderful special needs preschool. We really were financially unstable as we were having to pay for more therapies because the government wasn't going to help us. And we had to decide, do we pull Charlie from this amazing preschool where he's thriving because we can't afford it anymore? Like, what do we do? What do we do here? And during this time, we made lists, we made pros and cons. You do that over and over again until you kind of see where your heart's being led based on what you choose to write down almost.
Yeah.
It's a secret psychology test, I think. But then so many things happened that were out of our control in a good way. Charlie got a scholarship for aquatic therapy that we didn't even know was going to be offered, that his physical therapist like applied for him without even telling us.
Yeah.
Same goes with OT. His occupational therapist told us about a scholarship at the preschool that we didn't know existed. That was a 1-page form. And parents, if you're listening to that and you've ever filled out anything for special needs, there's no such thing as like a grant or scholarship that is a 1-page form. That it was a miracle. And I applied, through this huge program that was like reams of paperwork along with our pediatrician, all these other people. And we waited. And I still remember the day we got the notice in the mail that Charlie would receive supplemental money to pay for the therapies he was getting. It's like God had all of these things fall into place that we had no control over. Nobody, I could yell until I was hoarse and it wouldn't make a difference. But God knew what he was doing. And by trusting him and waiting patiently when we wanted to just have a decision, by trusting him, he was able to be kind of more amazing when he came through. But it was just enough day by day to get us through to the next point.
Well, which is just how God works so often. When we're in those situations where we feel most out of control and we see he is most in control, and it's just beautiful to see that. And so as you've gone through this walk and you continue to walk this road of raising Charlie and being a mom in hard places, it's required some bravery, I'm assuming. And I think there's people listening to this. I know there's people listening to this that just need encouragement to be brave. And I think even for those of us who may not have a child that qualifies as special needs, I think that we all have a child that is either has a learning issue, or maybe they're struggling socially, or there's some place that doesn't look like we would have wanted it to look, or we thought it was going to look, or like all the movies make parenting look. And so what's your encouragement? Just being brave in the midst of it.
It's so funny. I think being brave has almost so little to do with how you actually feel and so much more to do with what you do, like your actions versus your feelings. Because people talk about feeling brave, but I think rarely does anybody actually feel brave. It's more like you just choose to do the scary thing.
That's so good. Yeah.
And I think for us, being brave has looked a lot like praying in the car almost without words. And for Jody and I, my husband, talking to each other about things when really we'd rather just not communicate, kind of forcing yourself to do the things that seem less preferable and seem scarier because you know that God has presented you with this child that deserves that. This child deserves to have you fight for them in whatever that looks like, whether that means being brave enough to stay silent when you know this is not your battle to fight, which is a really hard one, or the opposite, which is being brave enough to speak your concerns even when you feel like, are these valid? Do I even have the right to say this? But I think, like I mentioned in the book, Deborah the prophetess, and how she was so strong. I mean, she was so powerful, but it was because her words weren't her own, they were God's. And she spoke with authority, not of her own, but of God's. And that's when you really can be brave, because you are walking in what you know, the steps that God has set before you. And so it's not you boasting and saying, I know the right answer because I know this. It's you saying, I know this because God is leading me here, and I'm just going to trust. And that's what bravery is. It's just trust that God is showing you the right way to do it.
Yeah. Yes, that's so good. And you touched on marriage, and I think that's such an important conversation to also have, is this, because this is not easy. Marriage parenting, let's be honest, parenting easy on the marriage at any given time, but especially the road that you can walk with special needs kids and some of the difficulties financially and otherwise. What's your best marriage advice for someone kind of walking through this? And I know we're all scared to give marriage advice, but just from your experience.
Oh my goodness. It's so funny that you're asking this, because in the beginning, when Charlie was first born, and those first few years were so traumatic that it almost felt like Jody and I didn't have marriage trouble because we didn't have time for that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's like in war, like you're united with your fellow soldiers because you're fighting this common enemy. We were fighting for Charlie, for him and for his health. And it was just kind of fraught. And so we were united in that. We're going to do what's best. And a lot of that looked like crisis management. But as he's gotten older, the marriage conversation and what that is shaping into is we had that conversation more and more. And I think for us, for me anyway, I would say the biggest thing that we have really just recently recommitted to is keep talking, even when you don't want to keep talking, especially when you don't want to keep talking about if your child is having a specific issue, or if you are having a specific issue, you and your spouse. It's so easy to, quote, put the kids first, because in a way it feels sacrificial, but that's not what God asks of us. He asks us to love him first, and then love our spouse so that we can better love our children, and so that they can see us love each other. And us making martyrs of our marriage for our kids doesn't teach our kids how to grow up and be married and be healthy spouses. And so I think having the hard conversations and then allowing our kids to see us work at our marriage and openly love each other and care for each other even when it's hard is the biggest thing we could do for them.
Yes, that's a good word for all of us. Yes, is putting our marriage, giving priority to our marriages. And so on a really practical level, I would love for you to help those of us who are not raising special needs kids to do well to those around us that are. And you write about a grocery store experience that stuck with me. I bet it sticks with me for a long time, about being in a grocery store and noticing some other kids had seen Charlie and were kind of snickering or doing, not being particularly kind. And the mom's response wasn't what we would hope for. And feel free to elaborate on that or change if I'm not saying that completely accurately. But it made me want to make sure that I do that well with my kids. And so help us do that. What does that look like? And what conversations do we need to have? And how is the best way to handle it in the grocery store or wherever we might be?
So for me, what I always try to tell other people is, I think the initial fear, if in parents anyway, is they don't want to be rude. It's like this layer of politeness that we're taught to carry around with us all the time, and just don't be rude. So what that often translates into for us is they pretend like we don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
They pretend like they can't see us in the park or wherever else. And it's kind of like they look over us, which nobody wants to feel like they're not seen.
That's so good.
What I love about little kids, this is what I love so much, is that they are not afraid to ask potentially embarrassing questions. Like, we'll have people come up and say, why do your legs not work? Why are you in that? What happened? And if a if their parent overhears this, they're just mortified.
Yeah.
And what I love about these situations is it gives Charlie a chance to engage. So even though he can't speak very well, or let's say he's having trouble with his device and I have to step in and talk with him, it opens up an opportunity for Charlie to become a person for them to learn that it's okay to ask these questions, because then you're having a conversation and we're not in our own bubble and it's not just a spectacle. So that's the advice I would give, is don't be afraid to engage, and don't be afraid to not say the right thing. It's so much better to, rather than kind of ignore it, or like this woman did, kind of like laugh nervously and walk away without engaging. It's so much better to just take a risk, be brave on your own right to maybe say the wrong thing, because then it is a conversation. And it's not just us on our side and you on your side, and understanding can happen if you can open up about it.
It's so practical. It's so good. And so what about somebody that people that what have people done that's really helped you walk this road well? If we have friends that are raising a child with special needs, if we don't have friends, we probably should. We need to be figuring that out. But what has been helpful? Like if you step back and look at people that have really been able to walk the road well with you, has it been meeting physical needs? Has it been meeting spiritual needs? Just someone to lean on, or some combination? What does that look like?
For me, it has been, I think, the emotional needs that has really been where I've needed to be met, and where I've needed, kind of that connection. And the things that have really touched me, I think there's this fear, like with my friends who have typically developing kids, that like they'll start to tell me a story of like something hard that's going on in their life. A kid's missed 3 days of school because they've been sick, or they're being tested for ADHD or whatever it is, and they're in this battle. And then I see this moment where they'll pause and they'll say, it's this caveat. I've heard it so many times. It's, oh, but that doesn't compare at all with what you're going through.
Yeah.
And what I always want to say, and this is so hard to remember, but it's not a competition. It's not like my level of suffering versus your level of suffering, and therefore I get to complain more than you, or whatever it is. I love it when my friends come to me and tell me what's going on, because it should never be a one-way street. Like, I don't want to be the needy friend who's always saying we're going through this, or we need this, or nobody wants to be that or feel that way. And so it's actually wonderful when my friends can be honest with me and tell me what's going on with them, because then it makes it easier for me to say my stuff. It's an equal exchange. And so that's my biggest advice, is just be willing to share your hurts and your hardships without a comparison. Just be open about it and honest. And then it makes it easier for that other person to share theirs and not feel, nobody wants to feel like kind of a charity case.
Yes.
And so an even exchange is so much better.
Yes. Oh, that's helpful. That really is helpful, because I can see that for all of us, not wanting to bring up something that seems kind of minor or small when you're someone that's dealing with something more significant, but being able to just to have those discussions. And it just reminded me too, raising a daughter with special needs. It told me something one time when one of my kids was being tested for some fairly minor stuff, that she said, you know what, it's okay to mourn it. It's okay to mourn it not being what you thought it was going to be, or it not being the easiest road for that child, or that child may struggle. And I remember her saying that as she's gone through this with her daughter, she's like, I would say every year or two, I mourn a new place that I didn't realize that was coming, and that's normal. And she said, that helps me too, though, when we can all talk about it together and just say, this isn't what we hoped for, and this isn't really what God hoped for before sin. God wants, that's why we have perfect healing in heaven. I thought that was a good word, just to give a little bit of freedom to us as well, to mourn some of those hard places.
Mourn those expectations that were not met.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we start to kind of wrap up, talk to us a little bit just about, I know you could go for days probably, but the blessings that you've received from raising Charlie and all of your kids. But I love how you just spoke in the book so positively about that too, that you're so honest and vulnerable about how it's been really hard, but the things you've seen that we wouldn't know. I love what you talked about with the disability paradox. I loved how you talked about the freedom from living off the grid. Could you just share a little bit of that, either or both? And if you don't get to it, then people can read the book for the rest. But I thought that was such a great, sweet encouragement.
There are so many blessings that have come out of raising Charlie. I talk about the disability paradox, which is like people say that people with disabilities tend to be happier than others, and they call it the happiness paradox. This idea that if you have a disability, they've tested levels of happiness, they tend to be equally or greater in their happiness than everybody else.
Wow.
And I talk about this in that I say, I take issue with the idea that it's a paradox because Charlie's happiness to me is not tied to the fact that he has a disability. It's just Charlie. I mean, he is the epitome of happiness. You see him in church when that music starts up, and you cannot help but smile and clap along with him. Like, it really is supernatural. And this idea that everywhere we go, people gravitate towards Charlie. I mean, we cannot go for a walk in the park without people. He waves at people and they want to wave back. And you can see this mirror reflection of his happiness on them. Like, you can see how he kind of spreads that joy. And it's not a joke. It is not just me with the mom glasses on saying, my child is so lovely. Like, it really is. Like, everybody says this is how Charlie is.
That's
and I would say the other thing for me is how much Charlie has opened up my life to sharing it with others, where I would probably have chosen to kind of pretend to have it all together and pretend to have it kind of be going my own way. And with Charlie, you can't pretend. I can't pretend that I didn't just drop his wheelchair on my foot, or that I can't get it in the back of the van, or that we haven't missed school because he's had a fever, because he's more susceptible. Like, these are things that you can't Instagram filter, you know? And I am so glad, because it's that living off the grid idea. It's that we can step out of that stream of competitive parenting and we can just do our thing however God wants to lead us, because those grids are not ours. And it has been such a blessing for someone like me who's a perfectionist to be forced to let go of that, because I don't think I would have if not for Charlie.
Yeah. Such freedom.
Yes.
Freedom.
It is the deep breath I didn't know I had been holding all my life.
Which is in and of itself the paradox, because you think have you been told 10 years ago what was coming, you do think, oh, how restraining or difficult, or who knows what our thoughts might be. But then with the freedom you've found in the middle of it is just only God.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, the book is amazing, you guys. It's Jamie Sumner, Eat, Sleep, Save the World, Words of Encouragement for the Special Needs Parent. And I'd say it's words of encouragement for any parent. I just highly recommend it. He's just got a great perspective and just a great love for the Lord that shows up on the pages. Not to mention, I mean, you know, you have just a few resume builders with writing for the New York Times and Washington Post. And I mean, you put in some writing, sister. Good work.
Thank you. I feel blessed that I got the chance.
Well, I love the book, and I would love for everyone to read it. And if they want to catch up with you, how do they find you? Do you hang on Instagram or your website, or how do people, I bet there's somebody listening to this that's going to want to reach out in some form or fashion. So how's the best way to do that?
I do. I have a website. It's jamie-sumner.com. You can email me there. There's a contact page. I'm on Instagram, Jamie Sumner _author, I think is what I am on there. But yeah, you can find me and message me there too. So
awesome. All right, Jamie, thanks for your time today. I love chatting with you.
Thank you so much.
All right, how about that, you guys? Here's another quote. I could sit and read you quotes all day, but don't worry, I won't. But I love this from her book. She says, my job as his mom, she's referring to Charlie, is to pass on the biblical truths that will not change with people or time or geography. The intangible can be more solid than the rest. And this is what I try to remember on days when the fear creeps in, say if I'm overly tired or we've had a hot spell or it's just Tuesday. We all think we're strong until the dam bursts. We all think we're capable advocates for our people until we are caught off guard. And she goes on from there. I think that is a good word for each of us, that our goal, our job is to pass on biblical truths that do not change. So I hope that encourages you. You're doing a good job. We're doing the best we know how, and with the Lord's strength, we'll get this done. We're going to raise people that love the Lord. All right, guys, we know your days are busy, so as always, thank you for joining us as we pardon the mess.